We are doing something new today. As you can tell, we are out in the field with my friend and colleague, Lee Irwin of Mason-Dixon Habitat. So I'll start by doing some introductions. I'll introduce Lee. As you saw in the emails when we got started, he's been doing this for since 1988 was your first planting, right?
First warm season grass planting.
And then you got into watershed restoration soon after that.
Watershed restoration, the early 90s, doing stream and wetland restoration and reforestation.
Cool. And now here we are, 2026. So over 36, 37, 38 years, almost 40. You're coming up on 40 years working in this field. Cool. So I got to know you because we were planting a native pollinator mix for quail, and we wanted to test different establishment methods to see how they would work. And so we hired you to do our strip plantings, our experimental plantings out at the Y Research Station and over at a few other sites on the Eastern Shore. That was my first time I met you. And then we've since been in touch a lot. Lee's helped us with getting deer hunting going. He helped us on our deer management hunting at Point Pleasant Farm. And you've also now planted our CRP at Point Pleasant Farm. So um, anything else you want to add about your sort of background experience?
My background is agronomy with training in horticulture, animal science. Went to University of Maryland. I was lucky enough to work out at the plant research facility, learned how to run large equipment, tractors, planters, those sorts of things. And then I had some engineering training as well. And I put all that together to build my profession of doing watershed restoration and habitat.
That's pretty awesome. I'm always kind of jealous at a university, you were able to get the tractor and hands-on experience with like equipment and machinery. How did that happen? It doesn't happen
It
to a
was
lot of universities.
just really good timing. I was in the ag program and there were positions available to work for the university at their research facility. And we planted agronomic crops, but we also did a lot of the research plots. So we had to be innovative in how we did it and scale down what the researchers wanted to make it applicable, and
Yeah,
learned a lot.
cool. So one of the I think one of the ways I think would be helpful to start. We oftentimes are on the phone, and
A lot.
we're on the road a lot.
Road time.
We're on the road a lot, and so I'm on the road for hour and a half, 2 hours at a time, and uh, and then so we just start the phone call, and then sometimes we'll just like be talking, and then it'll be silence for like 5 minutes, just driving along, and then another idea will pop up. We'll continue our conversation. It's actually been a really cool way to like just pass the time on the road. It's sort of like we're just hanging out and chilling as we drive places. So, and some of our conversations have been really interesting and unique, and thought it'd be useful to bring that to other people. So, but let's get started. We have a broad outline we'll cover that we talked about earlier. So maybe start at the big scale and then we'll drill down into like more narrow things. And just to give everybody an idea of where we're going, I think we'll start like landscape scale. What's on the landscape, what's missing, and then start thinking about how do you restore or get habitat going in each individual basic land cover type. And we are following plants because even though we're wildlife oriented people, like plants are what the wildlife depend on. So we'll talk about trees, shrubs, and herbaceous and wildflowers and things like that if we have time. And then and we'll dive into each of those. And I'm sure we'll go down some really interesting paths if we do that. So let's start with the landscape issue. Like, what do you see on the landscape right now that you think could be improved as you just look broadly, sort of the low hanging fruit for conservation and what we can do to enhance habitat?
Well, one of the things I've seen over the last 30 years is a lot of projects are just so narrowly focused, either one species of wildlife or one species of plants, whether it be herbaceous or trees or shrubs. And they're not really looking at the holistic picture of everything that should be taken care of on the site. And if we're doing a wetland project, they just want to look at the wetlands, not the buffer, not the transition from wetlands to meadow to shrub to forest land and so forth. And when you're managing for species, it's more than one species that's going to use that habitat. So how do we lay it out to be creating edge effect, diversity, low maintenance? How do we deal with invasive plants? And everybody's goals and objectives are a little bit different. and everybody's ability to do long-term operation and maintenance is different. Whether you're doing spraying, disking, fire, where we're sitting today in this region, fire is probably not a good.
Not gonna fly. Yeah,
No,
can't pull it off. We're sitting in Laurel, Maryland right now on a site where Lee's been working for weeks, months, years.
months. So this would be a
Yeah,
year, be 13 months here
right,
this week.
right. And so when you're in the middle of an urban environment, the suburbs surrounding you, smoke can be pretty difficult to pull off in terms of getting fire in here.
And risk.
Yeah, and risk. Okay, so and I think maintenance is one of those things. It's like I want to make sure it's sustainable, right? Whatever we do, if we step back, is it going to be okay, or what do we have to do long term to maintain it?
I've had the opportunity to hunt all up and down the East Coast and out west and fish, and the scale of the landscape is so different compared to where we are here in the Mid-Atlantic region to out in the Midwest. They have scale, they have diversity, they don't have to manage a whole lot. Here, we do have to manage. People have hunting leases, come hunt, but they never really manage the habitat or the forest or any of the other components of that habitat, and it's limited.
It's interesting you say that because I spent a lot of my graduate studies in California, where it's 100 million acres in California, and about half of it's public land. And there's such a different mentality here. Well, there's a couple of things that are different. One is we have just such abundant and regular rainfall here compared to the West. And California, some parts do pretty well with rainfall, but a lot of parts are pretty dry or it's very. And when I got out here, I was just amazed, like how much moisture allows for just a huge abundance of wildlife, like frogs, turtles. I'm in my backyard in a small little parcel, and I've got big snapping turtles showing up to lay eggs in my backyard, and I never would have had anything like quite like that in a more dry environment like Mediterranean California. So in some ways, I feel like it just because of that rainfall, we have like just a lot of density and like a lot of opportunities. Where on smaller parcels, you can get more than out west where it's drier and you kind of need thousands of
Exactly.
acres to
And the species that exist here on the East Coast versus the Midwest, they're they grow a totally different form and fashion. You could have a bur oak in Wyoming, doesn't look anything like a bur oak on the East Coast, both in size and both in mass production and
yeah,
habitat
yeah,
component.
yeah. So you like to think about like the whole continuum, and if there was certain parts of that continuum, some say from forests, shrublands, grasslands, are there certain parts that you think are low hanging fruit for conservation work?
Well, the grasses and forbs, herbaceous stuff is quick. And what we're looking at for projects is everybody has their own timeline. If you're older, you got a minimum amount of time to get your habitat to work to enjoy it before you're too old.
Hmm.
So you have to pick your species. And if you're doing herbaceous work, you can basically have that in the bag in 2 years. And shrubs, they're going to be fast producers. They're going to mature a lot faster. You get some 2, 3 years into that, you have production.
Hmm.
And trees, it varies. If we're planting white oaks, too bad for us.
For you, man. What are you talking about? I don't know about me. I'm sure.
Uh,
It's,
but there is other tree species we can pick to get your diversity and mixed age stands so that you achieve a quicker habitat response. And then that you have a succession plan in your vegetation that's going to take over
right,
down the road. So
right.
looking at all that scale and how it fits and looking at your soils, your slopes and exposure,
Mhm.
microclimates, all those things play a role in how we're planning to work in our landscape and achieve your goals and objectives.
Yeah. Well, one thing on the trees, even though it might take a long time, one benefit in our area is we have a lot of trees in the landscape already. Existing forests, about 45% of our landscape is wooded, is forest cover, tree cover. So a lot of times you might be able to use that as your wooded habitat, and maybe there's some opportunities for making adjustments. We've talked a lot about that,
Improvement.
or thinning and things like that. So, so you can kind of still you can get your mature trees that are already on the landscape. So if you have some woods, you can sort of harness that for stuff that's already there. So, one nice thing for us here in Maryland, it's not like if you're on an open site like this, yes, it will take a long time. You're planting from scratch, but also right over there, we got a
Free
bunch of
seed
woods right
source.
behind us. Yeah, cool. Well, I always look. I mean, when I got here, I like to do. I'm a big GIS nerd. I like maps, and I like to like quantify all these things. And so when I saw a forest for 45% of the landscape, second is agriculture on our land cover in Maryland, and then it goes down to I believe developed areas, and then turf grass, and then after that you start getting smaller ones like pasture and hay. And so I looked at that, I was like, it is almost, and then you get all the way down this pie graph, you get down to like 4% of what we'd call like that herbaceous vegetation, wildflower fields, native grassland areas. And so for me, I kind of think, well, that's a little tiny sliver of the pie that we don't have much of in this area. So like, how do we figure out where we can, and a lot of our species really need that and can benefit from it, including um, non-game and game species as well. And some people might think of like just a weedy grassland as waste ground. It has to be cultivated to be deer food, or it has to be a food plot. But in fact, a lot of these open grasslands can produce a lot of food. Just
Beneficial to a lot of non-gain species.
yeah. Um, so let's start. Should we start at the bottom with herbaceous, or should we go start at the top with the trees?
I'd say we start with herbaceous and work our way
All
up,
right, cool.
particularly on the timeline
Yeah,
that we work with.
yeah. So it's the first one to come in. You can get results quickly. You said 2 years. Elaborate a little bit on why you said 2 years for getting it started.
Number one is if you go to a seed supplier and you buy your whatever herbaceous mix you want, there's going to be a mix of either annuals and perennials in that mix. Some of those seeds are dormant seeds. Some of those seeds had to go through scarification and through the wintertime before they'll germinate. So it's going to take 2 years for you to achieve your goal. If your perennials grow the first year, they're not going to flower the first year. They need to go to their second year. So it's a 2-year process just to get it established and get it going. And then it just gets better after that.
Yeah, I also found like for our experiment, I remember we had all these methods, and it was quite an expensive batch. Native seeds can get expensive, right? And it was like, I don't know, it was in the thousands of dollars. And I remember I go out to our plots that summer and I'm looking at the ground. I'm like, man, I took like, let's say it was $2,000. I just took $2,000 and flushed it down the toilet.
This big.
I'm looking at all these weeds. We have all these like crabgrass and foxtail. All these weeds are growing in. There's not a lot I can do to control them because we have native grasses that were mixed in there. We didn't want to kill. So it was like, oh my God, we just wasted a bunch of money. And then you watch it. And we ended up getting pretty good establishment. Be patient. It was like late July. Started looking around. Oh, there's the black-eyed Susan. Oh, there's the Monarda. It's small, but it's in there. And some of these things. So yeah, that first year you might think it's like a wash. It's totally
if your grasses are 6 inches tall the first year, you're doing well.
Yeah.
And if you have excellent weather conditions, you could be a foot tall. But
right.
then year 2 is when it really takes
Really
off.
pops. And I also a lot of folks, and I used to as well, worry about the weeds and see this foxtail. And after that, my experience with that planting and other scents, I don't really worry about it. I find, and at least in our experimental planting, like the foxtail, which was dominant, it was like 90% of the grass of all the cover. Year 2, it sort of just fizzled itself out. It was something about like its
Well, we
process.
disturbed the soil surface. We brought that seed up to the top and it got sunlight and it took off and first flush.
Yeah.
We're dealing with seed banks. Some of the seed that's in the soil could be 20 years old and still germinate.
Right.
So you have a lot of different things that both beneficial and non-beneficial that can happen.
Yeah. And that's another aspect is like, you might not, I think seeding versus just letting things go fallow. Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a valuable thing. How much benefit do you see? And there are folks like Craig Harper, one of my role models, who did some economic analysis, and he was like, we can pay for seed and we can bring in seed sometimes from hundreds of miles away. So it's native to the North America, but it might be
different genotype.
It might be from, a different watershed, a different state, it might be from the Midwest. And it's like, or you can just let things go fallow and just spray out or kill the things you don't like. So I'm curious your thoughts on that approach and sort of the benefits to planting versus sort of letting things go fallow and seeing what comes out of the seed bank.
So I think it depends on your goals and objectives and your timeline. When do you want environmental results? How fast do you have to have it? How long can you wait? And I think there's conditions where particularly if you're doing floodplain restoration or wetland restoration or meadow restoration. If you have the seed bank there, you just need to let it do its thing.
Mhm.
It's going to take off. A lot of times we just supplement some plantings and some seeding areas and let everything else come in on its own. And if you're doing government projects, they have a lot of specifications you need to meet, and they don't want to wait, or they have a timeline for their measurable results, and or you have limitations and constraints based on how far away your seed source can be, whether it's seedling trees or herbaceous seeds. They want to keep that local genotype.
Cool. So you can, and then do you have some favorite seed mixes, like in terms of, so you can sort of monitor, see what comes in, and let natural stuff go, or you can, I kind of look at it also as like you can jumpstart the diversity maybe, and just like
So
guarantee you're going to get some stuff if you don't know.
yeah, I have two courses of action for that. One is looking at your soil types. So if you have different soil types on the same project area, you want to match your seeds, plant types to those soil types, whether it's poorly drained or well drained. Pick those out, and uh, when I seed, that imaginary line between those soil types is I don't like to be cut and dry. I overlap both seed types, for 30, 40 feet and let them sort themselves out. Even if once you plant a field with the same soil type, the plants are going to sort themselves out over a couple of years. They're going to compete, find their niche, get their clumps.
Mhm.
You're going to get your mosaic there, and then you got some good habitat.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Now, where would you go for people who are wondering, where do I find out my soil types? Where's your go-to location
Soil
on that?
types.
Yep.
So under the USDA programs, there's a soil survey that's developed for every county in every state in the United States.
Yep.
And that maps out your soils. It's on GIS layers now. When we
Mhm.
first started, it was a printed book and had your lines, and they've updated your soil types and grouped them together by soil associations now as well. And it says your limitations based on shallow soil, poorly drained soil, depth to bedrock, depth to groundwater table, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Whether it's droughty soils, good moisture retention.
Yeah. And there's also online. You can
It's
go
all
web. Yeah,
online.
web soil survey is like one as the main go-to tool I use, and you can sort of upload a
Even
polygon or create a polygon and
some
get
of
it.
your hunting apps now,
Yeah. And
OnX and
gotcha.
and Hunt Stand, they all have the soil maps as
Right.
well.
And then if you're new at this, and sometimes you'll get these outputs from your soil maps, and I'm like, what does Othello silt loam mean? And one of the tools I will plug that stuff into AI, and I'll just say, hey, can you just decipher this for me? I'll just copy the table out of there and I'll put it in there. It's like, can you just explain in layman's terms what we got here? And I think that's another tool to help people just sort of get a
Mhm.
better handle on it. How accurate do you find that to be?
I think it's fairly
Pretty good.
accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So you got soil types, and that's important because it's the sort of the foundation of what you put in. And then you might tweak your seed mix to for those
All right,
specific
and then
ones.
your
Yeah.
your disturbance history, whether it's in agriculture or left fallow,
Mhm.
what are your invasive plants, seeds that are there, or nearby,
Yeah.
so that you don't put yourself in a situation where you release all the invasives or you open it up and the invasives move in.
Yeah. I think of like Sericea lespedeza, like right here on this site. Like,
Yeah, this site is loaded with it.
So in a situation like this, and I know people who might be on this call might have Sericea lespedeza dominant or very common in their pastures. Would you think about seeding into that? And this is sort of softball question to throw up to you. What would you do in a situation where you got a lot of Sericea lespedeza in the field and you want to restore it to something better with herbaceous wildflower planting?
So it's going to take some management
Yeah.
because we need to eradicate it, and we most likely have a lot of seed source in the seed bank.
Mhm.
That's going to keep coming back. So you have to come up with again, what are your constraints? What's your ability to manage, whether it's chemicals, mowing, disking,
Yeah.
fire, all those things.
Yeah.
And I think there's enough tools out there that you could write a prescription for your particular location.
Right. Right. And I've been battling. So we don't have a lot of Sericea lespedeza, but I don't really want it to get worse. So I've been hammering on that lately. Pretty heavy last couple weeks, pretty hard with it's called Pasture Guard, which is a mix of, I think it's fluroxapyr and triclopyr mix, if I'm correct. But
It's
it's very
absolutely pretty
effective.
good.
It's
Very
very
effective.
effective, very quick acting and effective. So if you've got spot spray situations, or if it's very dominant throughout, you might need to do a full on.
Right. And when you select your seed source, just keep your broadleafs out and your wildflowers out and plant primarily grasses. And then you can control it and introduce those other species down the road when you have it under control.
Gotcha. And that's a good baseline of herbicides. A lot of herbicides are either selective for some herbicides will kill everything. Some herbicides will be grass only. Some will be broadleaf plants or forbs. So you can kind of tweak what you're describing is you could tweak and only use broadleaf selective herbicides to kill broadleaf weeds and maintain native grasses out there. Okay, so for people who are like, I want a clover plot, I need a clover plot in my field to feed deer. How do you see that fitting in to a larger sort of wildlife picture in light of also native wildflower seedings and what a native grassland that might have some other benefits, say turkeys,
So on
quail?
the landscape size, if you're looking at a farm that's 100 acres and you have some woodland and cropland and some marginal soils that are going to take out of crop production, look at your habitats, your travel corridors, the best place you want to put your food plot so it's going to be successful. And you can pull those target species into your food plot. And they're not going to wait till dark to come out. They want those travel corridors to get there on time. So that's what I look at. And, clover's probably just as easy as soybeans and other things as far as getting it established.
I think it's easier.
pH, you don't need a big planter. You just got to have some decent pH in your soil and a little bit of fertility. And you can spin it on.
Yeah.
You can frost seed it. You can do all these different things. So it's a really good beginner food plot for individuals that have limited resources.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of it as I find it's lower maintenance than soybeans and all these other things because it can grow with you have weed control issues, but it's also providing feed oftentimes in the late winter or winter, fall, winter, and early spring before soybeans and things.
This year was a good example of clover plots. I have several at our farm, and they're all 3 to 5 acres in size. They're big because of the scale of landscape we're working in. And we had ice and snow cover for about 10 weeks. And the deer hauled their way through that snow, scraped it all back, and they ate that clover down to the soil.
Wow. So they got through that ice.
Yeah. We had a couple days where they could break it and get through it, and they just kept working those areas larger and larger.
Yeah.
And when it melted, you go out to the field, it's like, see these big circles of just devoured dirt. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so they're kind of like, do you think of like clover fields as like the ice cream? And because I've also been so amazed at how I put deer exposures out in some native plots. And I've specifically been looking, and you helped me plant different native species that I have a sense are going to be preferred by deer because I want to have like a native herbaceous area that is going to fit as a food plot for those deer hunters who want to grow bucks and want to attract, want high protein. And I've just been amazed at how much some of these native plants are.
They're packed with protein.
Yeah.
And other minerals and vitamins that we need besides just clover.
Yeah.
And they do well in drought and all kinds of other weird weather conditions.
Yeah.
Where I think it's important to have that diversity.
Yeah. And low maintenance, right? No fertilizer.
Right.
Not really weed control. You can just let these things go. And I was also just amazed, and I will try to post a picture in the chat when we put this up on YouTube. Mare's tail. Mare's tail is like this hated weed in the agricultural community. Most people just think it's like a junk weed. And I have these exclosures in our food plots, and we've got a mare's tail problem. It's all in our clover plots. And inside the exclosures, it is 4 feet tall, and outside it is mowed to the ground. And I was like, oh my God, they're eating the heck out of this mare's tail. So and it's also like a high protein food. Maybe not the only thing you want in your field, but like I was just really surprised by how much forage is out there for things that we might think are.
There is. And what a lot of people don't understand is depending on your deer numbers, whatever wildlife species you're dealing with, they will selectively graze all the best stuff
Mhm.
first. Then they save the worst stuff for emergencies.
Right.
And so they high grade it.
Mhm.
So the more diversity you have, the better success you're going to have in your plant community. And not one species is going to get decimated.
Gotcha. Yeah. If you had to name some native plants that you think deer like, what would do you have
We know
some?
ragweed is one of them.
Ragweed, yeah,
Uh, we
and
found out Maximilian sunflowers is a preferred species of where you're at.
yep,
They're eating that down to nothing.
yep. I'll throw out a few others. When we were doing our sampling for actually with Dan Small at Washington College, shout out to Dan. He had a great mix that he was testing drone seeding, and he had New England aster in there when we were sampling it. We're going out and just measuring all these plants, and every time I'd see a New England aster, it was grazed, and I was like, I want to try that. So I threw that into the mix. I've got two desmodiums in the mix, ragweed and Maximilian sunflower. And I've since added like oldfield aster. I've not seen firsthand how well it works, but I've heard from people like Craig Harper, Dr. Craig Harper has mentioned it as a preferred one. So I added a lot of these into our CRP planting to try and provide deer forage and quail habitat. So um, cool. So anything else? So that's herbaceous plants. Herbaceous being like, you know, stuff that's not woody on the landscape, grasslands, wildflowers. Um, Anything else you'd add on like how you'd manage the landscape for those for the herbaceous
Well, on
component?
herbaceous, fire is our best bet, least expensive.
Hmm.
That's becoming more prevalent again because of the burn associations, and it's being written into management plans and more acceptable if you're in the right location.
Hmm.
And then mowing, disking, it all depends on the scale you're working at, and you don't want to wipe out all your habitat at one time. Break it down into little pieces, whether it's rotational mowing, rotational grazing, rotational anything.
Yeah.
Just keep it in slivers.
Yeah. Yeah. I had somebody ask me about rabbit. They were interested in rabbit. How we can maintain rabbits in my field, and they only had mowing as an option. And yeah, our prescription was like mow a third every year, ideally before April 15th or so, or maybe even first of April, before those rabbits start putting their young out on the ground. And then you have this sort of heterogeneity of 3 years of habitat on the landscape. So, and I'm also oftentimes, I think if you're going to mow, like mowing in that February, March up to beginning of April's time zone is the best time to do it. So you're leaving cover over the winter, and you're knocking it back before things start to breed and before birds start putting nests in there. And it is remarkable how quickly grasshopper sparrows start putting nests into your cover
Yeah, and
crops.
and again, it's looking at your timing
Mhm.
and what your other available habitats are. I looked at a project that we planted 4 years ago. It was 28 acres, and another colleague called and said, "Hey, Lee, we need to go talk to this landowner. They're mowing down all their herbaceous warm season grasses and forbs
What time of
in
year was this?
November.
Mm,
Terrible."
mm.
So we built all this habitat, and they were wiping it all out.
And explain
And
why is that a problem in November?
well, we have no cover.
Yeah.
We just lost all our food seed source that was out there.
Mhm.
And what I found out when we were talking about it, I went in and said, "Why are we mowing? Do you have a issue?" Well, it was aesthetics.
Mhm.
And I'm like, well, let's back up a little bit. The reason we did this is to promote habitat, promote cover, food source. And if you started mowing early, you're wiping out a lot of these plants before they have a chance to set their seed.
Mm.
So the annuals that are in those mixes are going to disappear because you're going to selectively remove them.
Yeah.
And guy looked at me and says, "Oh, didn't realize we were doing that." I
Yeah.
said, "If you're having a problem with the messiness, let's divide it in strips, and we're going to rotate it one strip every 5 years,
Mhm.
work our way across.
Right.
And that way, whatever bird species that are using that, they can jump on the other side and still be okay.
Yeah.
And we're not putting them out there for predators and everything else."
Yeah. And I'd actually prefer disking to the mowing if you got the tractor and the disc. And some people might not have all that equipment, but I think the disking with the soil disturbance, it's going to set back your trees a bit more, and it'll be a little bit more helpful to long term for disking, I think. But yeah, so like I think of they used to mow a lot of the buffer strips at the Y where I worked, and you'd get out there in November. It would be mowed around August, September, and you get out there in November, and it's cold, and the wind's blowing hard, and there's just nothing on the ground, and that wind's just clearing through right through up to the trees, but there's relatively a little understory or cover under the trees, so it's just like there's nowhere to hide, nowhere to stay warm, and
Yeah,
you know
no
it's cold.
thermal cover.
Yeah, I think of the thermal cover a lot, and yeah, just hiding from predators, so like or hawks and things that just sit on trees, and they're hungry too.
Hmm.
So, um, cool. So management, that's important. Yeah, on fire, and I'll throw a shout out to the Prescribed Burn Association, Kyle Magic, Ken Oland. They are both, I think, leading that. There's several people involved. Fabio Turlovich. Great resource there if you're interested in learning more about burning. To check in with them. And I would say, you say it's cheaper. I will say it's expensive, especially to get started.
Once you're set up.
But once you're set up and you've got the equipment and you've got the expertise and you've got the burn plan made up, then it becomes easier. So I don't want to mislead people to thinking it's not, because it took us a couple of years before I started talking.
Yeah. And now with the Burn Association too, you can accumulate equipment, volunteers,
Yeah.
all those different things to help.
And a big shout out to Quail Forever. They just gave a donation to the Prescribed Burn Association to help make the donations needed to buy up a prescribed burn trailer. So they're in the process of, like, I think they're very close to their goal. If you'd like to donate, I'm sure Kyle Magic would love it. Hit me up, my email or any other way for how you can give a donation. But I think they're very close to being able to get a proper burn trailer with everything they need to be able to run a burn and bring it out to your property, bring some people. And it's one of these voluntary things where you help out a little bit and they help you, and it's a really nice community right there. So they helped us burn. You were on that burn. We burned about 60 acres in one day. Had two crews going. Got a lot done. We got like 90% of our burning for the year done in one day. It was nice. Okay, so Herbaceous, we got 20 minutes left. We can go a little bit longer, just for the audience who has to leave. Yeah, we started a few minutes late, so we'll go a little bit late, and we run a little bit late. So if anybody has to jump off, we'll be recording this. We'll put it up on YouTube. So, but let's hammer in on now. We'll move up in structure from our sort of herbaceous vegetation, like we're sitting right here, to a shrubby kind of environment. And let's maybe talk about what do you see as the best benefits to shrub cover?
Well, first of all, you need to transition from meadow to forest. Shrub cover is our transition. It's also winter cover, thermal cover for a lot of different species. It establishes fast. It produces a food source fast, usually 2 to 3 years.
And what kind of food resource? Like browse?
Browse, we're looking at soft mast. Some are hard mast, depending on your species. So, and you can deal with the variation of soil types from very, very dry upland shrubs to very wet upland shrubs. So you can match that in between. And when we're talking about shrubs, we're also including small trees that, grow less than 15 foot high.
Right.
So people forget about that. Yeah. And, you got a lot of other species like your crab apples or your apples and plum. All those are in our shrub family, but they're larger shrubs.
Stature, yes. Small stature trees or really large shrubs, yeah. And we just put out a guide with Daniel Pratz, and I think Kyle was on that as well, and Ben Larson, on having a list of small stature trees for tree plantings, because a lot of our tree plantings tend to be large stature trees. So again, adding diversity of some of this transition zone from our mature forests, which are like these behind us, over 100 feet tall, to something that's going to be in that 20 to 30 foot tall at the maturity that they're going
to. Yeah, and when you're looking at your management type, if you're doing fire, there's a lot of those that are fire dependent and can withstand that burning.
Yeah.
And do well.
Yeah. Which ones in particular?
Well, plum is our favorite.
Yeah.
It sets it back, keeps it from getting too big, but it just bounces right back all the time.
Right. And that's Chickasaw plum is the one that you like. I think we planted a lot of that.
Yeah, we have Chickasaw plum here. Chickasaw plum has been moved eastward by our indigenous people a long time ago. It was traded. It was an edible fruit. So it's up and down our East Coast, and it's all the way to the Midwest.
Right.
And when you get closer to the Mid-Atlantic or the coast, we have a beach plum, which is similar, grows in very sandy conditions. So those are our two plum. And then we have an American plum, which is more tree-like, but smaller in stature.
And are they good to eat? Are they tart? Are they, or can humans
We've
eat
been
them?
eating Chickasaw plum for the last couple of weeks.
You sent me a picture of
I
all
sent
those
you a
on
picture
your,
of a
yeah.
big,
I wasn't sure if you were using those as bait or they were your snack.
that was a snack.
Okay,
And we're collecting all our fruit right now for seed.
cool. So one thing we haven't talked about, and briefly we saw a question come in on the chat about how do you manage native warm season grass meadow, and we talked a little about burning. I think sometimes, in some cases, herbicide can be a tool. I think if you have certain things getting out of control, burning, disking, grazing is something that I think
Grazing
is
is important.
important. I think it's a tool. I think if you're going to use grazing, try and leave structure on the landscape of 12 inches or more, 12 to 18 inches. So something has that thermal cover over winter. And
And
herbicide.
pull your livestock off so that your grasses have a chance to rebound before the end of the growing season.
Right. So you have something left over winter. So now this is something that I was just at the Rolling Plains Quail Research Ranch in Texas on the Quail Masters course, which is awesome thing that I recommend if anybody's interested in Texas habitat management and quail. I grew up in Texas, so it was an excuse for me to get back there a little bit more and learn and expand my horizons. But they're a little cautious about livestock out there for quail because the challenge is once you buy a certain number of cows for, let's say, average rain conditions. And so you have 100 cows and your pastures can handle 100 cows, 50, whatever the number is. And then you hit a drought. It's very hard to unload for people to sell their cows. Oftentimes you have to sell them at not great prices. And so,
And everybody else is liquidating at the same time.
yeah, everybody else is getting rid of their cows. The prices are dropping. And you're like, I don't want to get rid of my cows at that price. So now I'm stuck with 100 cows and we're in a drought and they're unfortunately grazing. Either you have to pay it by very expensive hay or you let them out and graze things down even more than ideal for your bobwhites. So, or other wildlife. So it's one of those tricky things. If you're going to have livestock, kind of think about how you can manage them, especially if you're in an area where it's,
Yeah, and
and
I
that can
would
happen here too.
also depends on your soil type as well, because
Mhm.
if you have very high sandy, well drained material, your recovery time is a lot more.
Yeah.
And you're dependent on late summer rains and end of season. Once the temperature drops, the warm season grasses don't grow;
No.
they slow down.
Yeah.
So timing, pulling them off on time, looking at your soil. Our soils that we have here, most of our Piedmont soils hold a lot of moisture. You know, if
Hmm.
we're down on the eastern shore, we're in the coastal plain, you're anywhere from clay to beach sand. So same rule applies to look at your conditions if you're going to graze it and understand when it's too much.
Yeah. And I would also add one other thing. A lot of times we talk about these as grasslands, but more and more, I think we've increasingly moved to the benefits of forbs. And I like Bob Long's term with DNR. He's always saying we should call these forb lands. And I'm always liking that term. Grass is an important component, but not all grass. Want, especially for species like bobwhites, but even for deer, turkeys, the forb component, which are these broadleaf plants. Like I'm sitting right here, broadleaf plants here compared to a grass. Oftentimes, these broadleaf plants are giving a structure that's better for a lot of wildlife. Generally, a lot of better forage value for like deer. Whereas grasses are good nesting cover, for especially for bobwhites. They're not this grass, but native grasses, and structure and like hiding. So, and also the ability to carry fire if you're going to use fire. I saw we also had a question coming from Leslie about um, benefits of disking versus mowing, and we briefly said that I prefer disking, and I got that from Bob Long. Shoot, when I first started working at it.
Yeah,
And,
strip disking is, I think, very beneficial. Loosens the soil back up, exposes other seed in the seed bank,
mhm,
sets back those plants that are a little more robust. When we started doing our warm season grasses back in the late 80s, switchgrass. That was the thing.
mhm,
We have switchgrass is so robust. It's monoculture and not very good
yeah,
habitat.
right,
Burns really nice,
yeah,
but there's really nothing in it.
right,
Deer hide in it.
yeah,
So it's taken us 15 to 20 years to actually manage that grass, knock the switchgrass back. We have more Indian grass, gamma grass, and blue stems mixed with it now,
mhm.
and some open areas where we're getting some forbs and things. It's a heck of a lot better.
I would also add the process of mowing tends to drop thatch on the ground, covers the soil surface, and it tends to, not always, but it tends to produce more grass. Like the process of mowing, grasses are very adapted at regrowing after cutting. They're grazed, like they've adapted with evolutionarily with grazing.
It's
So
like
they're
grazing,
used to being,
right?
you're cutting the grass and it provides more grass. Whereas disking, especially if it's done in the winter, when you still have some frost left in front of you, January, February is late, but you can go, anywhere. I think some folks had disc in October. I was at the Quail
Hmm.
Forever meeting last Saturday, and it was a field trip they did, and they had disked something in October, and it was full of forbs. And so I think generally, rule of thumb is like winter disking is going to provide more forbs compared to grasses. So that's one of the benefits
Yeah,
of
and when
disking.
you look at your when your seeds are being produced, and we want that seed laying on the surface,
Yeah.
over winters, stratifies, scarifies both
Mhm.
with the freeze and thaw,
Yeah.
and it's ready to go in the springtime.
Right. And then I think there's also something about disking provides that bare ground, which provides a structure that a lot of our ground nesting birds need and want. And if you've ever seen dove pecking around on open grassy gravel dirt areas, they get grit from these open areas. I think there's something about that structure with bare ground that they're either able to identify and see insects, see seeds, pick up grit. There's something about bare dirt in between plants in like a forb dominated area that's like just really they will key in on its importance. So that's another aspect of disking that creates a structure, whereas a mowing would create this thatchy layer on the bottom. They don't have access to the grit. They might have a harder time finding insects
And
in there.
seeds, seeds are all down in
It's
the.
all buried in
It's like right
this
here
man. Yep.
in front
Yeah,
of
we've
us.
got it right here. Yep. Cool. All right. So we went off a little jump back to herbaceous. So we've got a couple questions done now. Let's get back to our shrubs. So we were talking about plums, fire adapted plums, shrubs or fire adapted shrubs, and not those that aren't, and some that aren't. So there are like eastern red cedar is the first one I think about. That's if you burn them, they will oftentimes die, which can be a good thing because cedar can be pretty aggressive and
It's a good way to manage it. Other species like chokeberry produce a lot of soft masts, but the deer also like to browse black chokeberry. They'll not nibble them right down.
hmm
So it's a food source. It's a browse. Doesn't really kill the plant. They'll regrow. They'll get thicker. That kind of stuff. But there's so many different species out there that are available. Beautyberry. The list goes on and on and on and
Yeah,
on.
I liked. Again, I'm biased. I want to have things
Strawberry
feeding all
bush is
wildlife.
another one.
Strawberry bush, gosh, the deer love that. I like to have things that deer like, and that's going to work well for quail. I know a lot of people might not want to attract deer, but for those of us who want
They're
to,
here.
yeah, they're here. And if you want to just feed them, or like just, I like the idea of just growing it majestic, getting an animal to reach its fullest potential, and providing it everything it can, and seeing a majestic, mature buck on the landscape is just it's a special sight to see. So I like to sort of support that in general. Um, so, gosh, what about? So you mentioned choke berries. Do you ever use choke cherries?
Chokecherry is a good one.
Yeah.
Another one, fire adapted, and it doesn't get real big. It stays in a shrubby form. You can mow it down. Everything else,
Mhm.
grazing the livestock on it is probably not so great, just because of the problems with the cherry bark.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was out in South Dakota, and I think they used choke berries, choke cherries. They had some type of I think western cedars out there, and these lines, and they were using these as strips for habitat. So yeah, um,
Blackberry is another good one.
rubus, and blackberry also it will come in. A lot of these will come in on their own too. Hazelnuts. We haven't mentioned hazelnuts, but produce
Hazelnuts is a
mast, hard
really good
mast.
one.
Yeah.
Pawpaw's a good one if you have shaded cover. A lot of deer, they don't eat the plant itself. They love the fruit. They
Mhm.
will not browse the plant.
Yep. Persimmons, also like we're getting now into the trees. We're shifting over to the trees a bit, which might be a good transition point. But so the shrubs, I'll just briefly add, and maybe this will open up a few things. Is for bobwhites, everybody who's followed me at all knows I'd like to see bobwhites back in our landscape, and I think in particular why it's not just because I'm obsessed with one bird. I kind of am, but it's also just like they represent. If you can, they're like a finicky indicator bird. Whereas if you can get them back, then you're doing something really good to get the whole community,
You're going to get all the other associated species with it.
including deer. And a lot of people might get concerned when they see quail habitat management of like, let's say timber harvest, timber thinning, moving from a crop field of soybeans, which is a lot of good deer forage, moving from that to a native forb dominated field. And they might be thinking, this is going to destroy my deer hunting.
No, it will not.
Yeah.
I shoot more deer in the warm season grasses than I do in the woods.
Yeah.
And you have to think about your agronomic crops that are also food plots, whether it's corn, beans, or wheat or whatever. It's there for a while and then it's gone. It's a desert after that.
Yeah.
So unless you leave it stand for the grain, if it's a herbaceous grazing plant, like, forage beans or regular soybeans, once you harvest it, it's gone,
Yeah.
other than a little bit of waste grain.
Yeah.
And then there's a time frame if you're going to reestablish a small grain onless wheat or something after that, you got a waiting period before it starts to go. So those animals have to go someplace else to feed. So you have to have something else next by. If you have your forbs and diversity in your meadow, that's where they're going to be.
It's right there.
They can eat where they sleep.
Yeah. And in a native meadow, you'll have plants that are growing at the beginning of April that start to grow that have young shoots, young, easily mature,
Lush.
digestible, lush, shoots coming up in April. You'll have some starting in May. You'll have some starting in June. And so and there's hundreds of species, possibly thousands. I think it's probably realistic you'd have thousands of plant species in a meadow. And so because of that, you have things starting at all different times, all different nutrition, all different maybe nutrient aspects to them, like minerals and other things like that. So they can pick and choose and get a lot out of those sort of native pastures as well. So just want to put a plug in that this can also be really great for your deer stuff too.
Same with your shrubs.
Yeah.
The browse is better at certain times of the year,
Right, for
spring or
winter
fall.
browse. Yep.
Your trees, a lot of buds. If you're doing some forest stand improvement and you're cutting trees down, you come back the next day, the deer have eaten all the buds off the trees.
And they will eat the twigs, the little twigs off the edge of those branches, and they will use that for forage, and especially in winter. So, and the other thing to maybe close on to before we move on to trees is for quail, which I got on this whole thing on, is a lot of times they need that shrubby cover. Somebody has talked about them. We talk about them as a grassland bird, but actually we might want to start thinking about them more as a shrubland. They're a shrubland obligate bird.
Yep.
And I think
so what you and I talked about the other day was you can plant all the herbaceous cover you want, but you still have to have the three components. You got to have the nesting cover, the brood cover, and the overwintering cover, which is thermal cover and food. And a lot of legume shrubs provide us that thermal cover, but they also provide seed, durable seed that won't decay over the wintertime. Hard seed coat, lays on the surface. It's available.
What legume shrubs are you thinking about?
A lot
Locust,
of
like locust?
No, not locust, but you have false indigo. You have bicolors are not native, but it's here, and it's a useful one.
Right.
Senna.
I think locust could be a good. It becomes a tree.
It's a tree.
But it puts out seeds that look like they're quality.
Maryland senna, common senna, and they both, even though they're related, one holds their seeds a lot longer than the other. So if you have both species, you can extend that food source later on. We were quail hunting, not last year, but the year before, down at our friends, and it was cold, it was windy, and they were complaining about how thick some of their legume shrubs were, and they called it rank because they couldn't see the dogs. When the quail flushed out, they went out the other side, you couldn't get a shot. I'm like, crawl in here and feel the difference of the temperature where you're standing now and down here 8 inches off the ground. It had to have been 10, 15 degrees difference, warmer. The sun's warming up the leaves and the ground's dark, and they didn't want to leave it.
And the snow melts faster in there too.
Yeah.
It holds snow off the ground, and it also melts faster in that warmer environment from the plants themselves.
But that structure is so important.
Yeah.
Because birds of prey can't get into it. And when it's really thick, even the foxes and all the other ground predators have a hard time getting through it.
Makes it harder for them. Yeah. It's not an easy run them down situation. They got to work for it if they're going to try and get a bird out of there. Great. Shrubs, super important for bobwhites and for a lot of structure on the landscape. And I would say, Dan Small, I'll highlight something I learned from him a long time ago. He said, shrubs are their limiting factor. And that's something they've really been focusing on because it takes some time for them to get them established in certain environments. So they've been really focusing on trying to find ways to
Well,
get that.
we just spent a lot of time working on your shrub mott's
Yep.
at a Point Pleasant. Species composition, and Dan Lawson from NRCS designed that.
Mm-hmm.
But we did a little modification in the field based on our shapes and length and spacing to get that escape cover
Mm-hmm.
and thermal cover that we need so they're not going for the woods.
Yeah.
I spent 14 days in Kansas last winter in January hunting quail. And I spent a lot of time taking pictures of shrub mott's. And they were all different shapes and sizes. And some were really long, went on for hundreds of yards. They weren't real wide and almost acted like a hedgerow. And these are all natural. Nobody's manipulated them. They've been burned by fire, but then you got the round clumps, odd shaped clumps. And every time the dogs went on point, you didn't know if it was a pheasant coming out, quail coming out, and a lot of times we had deer coming out.
So a lot of things using those shrub mott's. And I will throw out a rule of thumb that Dale Rollins coined. I think he has he calls it the sheet method. And make sure you get your spelling right on that. It's SHET, or is the Shet method. And I think I'm gonna butcher it, but it has to do with basically how far, but you can throw a softball to a shrub clump. And sorry, Dale, for not getting the acronym right. He'll get on to me when I see him, hopefully in the next few months here. But so say it's 100 yards. No, a softball more like 50 yards, right? They're big, they're hard to throw far. So like I'm thinking 50 yards, every 50
feet.
Not a whole lot of distance, so that these birds can get up and get into those shrub mott's if they're being chased by a predator. So
yeah, the longer a quail's in the air, the better the avian predators are going to see it and can pick it off.
Yeah.
So they're like up, down, gone. And they hit the ground and they run. And if they can run through the bottom of the shrubs like that,
and they lose them.
It's, yeah.
Cool. So that's the shrubs. So we have frequently spaced shrubs on the landscape is important. And I'm finding our blackberry bushes are coming in on their own and providing a lot of that structure pretty early on. And I think we'll see them continue to get thicker. So blackberry is a good one to have. And also at that same property we're talking about, the blackberry thickets where we also flushed a bunch of quail.
Yep.
I always find them in those rank places that you just like, I want to get, a lot of people might say that is thorns that I don't want to deal with on my farm. I don't want that on my landscape. And you might think I can't walk through there. My dog's going to get hurt or whatever, get poked or whatever. But that's really important.
You still have to have some of that cover because even if we don't want to get in, our dogs don't want to get in, the predators don't want to get in it.
Yeah.
And it gives them safe haven.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you're an aspiring hunter, you're energetic, you tough it up and you get it.
Send your kids
so
in.
So the dogs, yeah. Yeah. You send Luke in. What are you talking about, man? I think I was the one in there. Yeah. No, I'm joking. Cool. All right. Let's ready to turn to trees.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit about how at the start on the landscape where we have trees, 45% of the landscape in Maryland, followed by ag, followed by development, turf grass. And then we get to hay pasture, and then we get to like early successional further. It's like way down on that list. So I see trees because they're such a big part. They're the largest single land cover on our landscape. So from a habitat wildlife perspective, I'm thinking like, where do I have space to work with? And I think our trees are a huge opportunity for us to work with in terms of we can work with them economically. We can enhance them. We're not putting a farmer out of business. We're not telling a farmer they have to take their crops off. And so I see that as an area where it's a huge opportunity for us. But the biggest thing is I find a lot of people really, and I can understand. I feel bad when I cut down trees sometimes.
I do too. But a long-term friend who's a forester, part of his marketing, trees are a crop, which is true. It's just a long-standing crop, a longer rotation. And there's nothing wrong with cutting your trees if you manage it properly. Like everything else, got to have a plan. What's your goal? What habitat are you trying to preserve? Are you just doing it for timber? Are you doing it for wildlife? Are you doing it for both? And what kind of diversity do you want? And, we're seeing in habitat management anywhere from select cutting to far stand improvement to clear cutting. And all of them are really good tools or techniques um, in the right place and what you're trying to promote. So you have a lot of trees. We have three properties that are contiguous. All three properties before we owned them were managed differently in accordance to the forest land, anywhere from rape and pillage to never touched. And we saw decline of our oak species up on top of the ridge for a couple different reasons. And we never wanted to cut those trees because we were worried about acorn production. Those are our best, biggest trees. Mm-hmm. Well, probably half of them never produced acorn because they were already done, or never did. So we went through, selectively removed some of those species or individuals, I should say. The first cut we did was 63 trees out of 20 some acres. 63, that's all we touched.
Right.
And we did some removal of pulpwood type stuff because they were crowded or stunted or crooked or kind of in the way, and released the best trees that we left.
Yeah.
What a difference. And then we just did two other sections.
In particular, we say, what did you see? Like, what were so you thinned out, you did a thinning? Was that how you describe it? You left
We did a thinning.
Behind?
We did a very selective thinning. The first one was, we took probably the biggest trees, but not the best biggest trees.
Gotcha. Yep.
And we left certain individuals full, nice, dominant crown that we knew were acorn producers, both red and white oak species, and opened the woods up, got some understory underneath of it. When you talk about the softball thing, we could have thrown a softball 100 yards in the woods, you could see.
Right.
On no understory.
Right.
No diversity. And
no food either. No cover, no food.
Acorns fell. They've cleaned up desert.
Yeah.
So no browse, no nothing.
Right.
So that's all now been 15 years on the first round. And then the last two pieces that we did, we went back to the original farm, did an improvement, forest stand improvement cut on the balance of the property, and then did the two adjacent farms. Got everything kind of in sequence now where it should be. Mm-hmm. And one of the properties has a northern exposure. It's a shared property line. Had a lot of problems with trespassing. A lot of the deer would move out into those fields, people spotlighting and stuff like that. We did a border cut. I wanted a 45-degree angle from the edge of the field all the way back. We took out a lot of trees, but we left our white oak, some of our best producing red oak. When I say white oak, both white oak and some of our chestnut oak as well. And man, did we get the browse. But we also got the protection. The deer don't step out of the curtain from the forest to the field immediately. Right. They have transition. They can browse their way out. There's a lot of protection there. Wind protection, because of northwest prevailing wind that we have. If you're close to that edge, there's no wind at all. So now the deer are bedding down on the inside of the woods along that buffer. Right. Because they can smell you coming. They don't need to see you, but there's great thermal cover.
Right. So you're getting vegetation growth as a result of getting more sunlight into the ground. You're getting a flush of shrubs, herbaceous
grasses,
plants.
Trees, blackberry everywhere.
Yep.
So we're getting that food source, and it's a browse source as well.
Yeah.
And it's keeping out a lot of the Japanese stiltgrass.
Yeah.
Coming in because we have that other
sun coming in. Yeah. Somebody actually asked a question. I think it was Bob asked about how do you manage stiltgrass invading, and I found I don't see it in full open sun like that. It'll be in here a little bit, but it's not nearly as dominant as in shaded environments in the forest. And it's like, it is just beats everything else out. And one tool, I think one sustainable tool is to get more sun and outshine the light onto that environment, and other things start to outcompete. Beyond that, I'm now moving towards herbicides. On my first year of using Prowl H2O, Plateau works well, and there's another one called Prodiamine. All three of those were very effective as a pre-emergent herbicide that you apply in March before they start germinating. But I'm very curious to see what comes back next year. So there was no stilt grass growing. It stunted some other annuals that would have grown as well, but there's other plants that were perennials or the things that are growing up. So I'm curious to see if that still progresses right back in those spots or whether it kind of knocks it
I think
out.
what I've witnessed is once we get our understory gone, we're out competing it.
Right.
The log roads that we have, even though we seeded those,
Hmm.
are now dominated by stilt grass
Mm,
because they're open.
right. Hmm. So are you moving to herbicides to try to control it, or so
Hmm.
what your plan is? Yeah. So stay tuned on that. Definitely, if you want to get rid of, I know it works very effectively in year one. These herbicides that I mentioned, they're very effective. And then we will see on whether the seed bank starts to come back next year. And then because I'm not a big fan of having to annually put out pre-emergent herbicide to kind of keep something down. So we'll see how it unfolds. It might be something that we do for a few years, but it's yet to be determined.
We need
In
to get
my
back on our trees.
Yeah, thank you. So trees. The other thing I think about, you mentioned clear cuts. I was at a clear cut, and it's a scary thing to think about. I remember my fourth grade science book showed a clear cut and said, "This is bad." It said basically, "This is bad," and it's a very dramatic surgery on the landscape. Right? It's a very dramatic surgery. Um, but I've been to several, and I think of one in Southern Maryland I was just at recently. It was 3 years past, and it was coming back it was just, like, so beautiful. Something you just don't see on the landscape. You don't see a regenerating forest from 0 into year 3 very often. It's kind of a rare sight. It's a rare type of ecosystem that we don't have anymore, and historically, that would have been produced from, like, fire or other major disturbances, probably fire being the biggest one. So, anyway, um I mentioned that about clear cuts because I think it's a tool. It is dramatic. It is a big surgery, but it also can create some of this earlier successional habitat on a
Right.
landscape.
And again, the scale of your landscape is really important.
Mhm.
If you only have one 10-acre piece of woods and you cut the whole thing, you just change that for a long time.
Very different, yeah.
If you got 1,000 acres and you're doing 10-acre clear cut, that's diversity.
A
Big
lot of
improvement.
diversity. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
And we're looking at all the birds, the forest interior dwelling birds that are listed in the guides. And gosh, so many of them bring their young to the edges of those forest openings. Exactly you described. You have a 3-acre patch clear cut in the middle of a 15-acre area, and they will bring their young to those early successional fields to feed to those areas to feed their young where there's more insects, more sunlight getting to the grounds. There's a lot of stuff in there. Whippoorwills, which to my understanding used to be common here,
Yeah. But how
they're
many do you
gone.
hear at night now?
I don't hear any
'Cause we
around
heard them
all
as
southern Maryland.
kids
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah. And the first time I heard them in this area was West Virginia at Cacapen State Park. I will highlight them as a place where you can go still hear whippoorwills.
We hear them at home on occasion.
And it's interesting type of forest, and it's a very, like, kind of hard to describe. There's a lot of characteristics to it, but we were trying to nail this down on how you would describe this. But it would be a, a spaced out trees. So you want to have not real dense tree cover, spaced out, but you also want short understory. So a lot of times what happens here is if you clear out your woods, it gets a very thick, dense understory. So they tend to like a shorter understory. I think historically how that would have been on the landscape, I just think where the people maybe grazing, they would have timbered and then grazed in their woods, and that would have kept the vegetation down a bit more and had more ideal conditions for whippoorwills or some other aspects to it, maybe certain soil types where you don't get as much of a flush in the understory. But yeah, whippoorwills have definitely disappeared from big areas. And I think of them in terms of forest management of one of those birds you can recover by getting some of that habitat going again. I think it's
The
well, I'll check in the
thing I want to
questions,
say
but
about
yeah,
trees
yeah,
is, again, in your goals and objectives and your timetable that you have, if you're planting white oaks, expect a long time before you get results other than structure before you get mass. It's going to take a long time. Most of the oaks. There's some natural hybrid oaks that are out there people have bred that produce fairly quickly. They're soft mass trees. Persimmons is one of them. It's a really good one. And there's, crab apples and that kind of stuff that we talked about. People want to plant because you get a fruit, and there's so many different crab apples out there.
hmm
There's a lot of trademark names for all these things that we're dealing with, whether it's chestnuts, crab apples, or hybridized oaks or anything. Some of these plants have been around for a long, long time. Heirloom plants.
hmm
But if somebody comes up with a fancy name, they trademark them, then they're going to charge you 4 times what they're worth. to buy them,
Right.
but they're out there and they exist, and they help us with our timelines as far as structure and food. So they can be considered in your initial plantings with your long-term species of your white oaks and your red oaks and that kind of stuff. And you can select from either one of those groups based on your soil types, your microclimates, your exposure, and those things.
Yeah.
Like, we're on here where we're sitting today. You see willow oak, you see shingle oak, you see post oak, you see Spanish oak, which is the southern red oak, that kind of stuff. And then you see white oak mixed in it. You go 60 miles north of here, chestnut oak, swamp white oak, black oak. I know I'm forgetting a couple,
Yeah.
but they're all important for us because they're long lived, and those long lived species can tolerate a lot of environmental change over time,
Hmm.
and they're still going to be here.
Right. So yeah, we talked a lot about thinning trees and what you can do there, but also planting trees. So I think that's important to dive into a little bit more too. How about chestnuts? I know you're pretty deeply involved with like
We are.
chestnut and stuff. So tell us where's the status? I know
There's a
they're
couple
always
different
working on
camps out
something
there
to get it
about
going. Yeah.
purity and genetics and that kind of stuff, and that was one of our keystone species in our forest land, and they're gone. And the go-to plant was Chinese chestnut for a long time for the food source. Totally different characteristics in the plants. It's tolerant to the blight. And then we have the hybrids, which are American Chinese chestnuts, and we have American European chestnuts, and we have Asian chestnuts. We have all these different ones out there. And you'll see them advertised on the internet. They all have fancy names. They all have different sized nuts from smaller to larger, including the Allegheny chinkapin, which is a shrub chestnut. Um, very beneficial to our wildlife and as humans for consumption of
Hmm.
those nuts. My personal opinion is there are some American chestnuts out there that are resistant to the blight, but it's going to take a long time for us to get all those established and repopulate what we had. So there's a lot of research based on genetic modification to add different things to make the plants tolerable to the blight. Hybrids, genetic hybrids, where the European and Asian species are resistant to the blight, bred with our American chestnut. And there's so many other Chinese chestnuts in the landscape that if you're getting American chestnuts out there, sooner or later, you're going to have those trees close together and you're going to get the hybridization, whether you want it or not. So again, depends your location, what your plan is, what your goals are. I think they're beneficial to the landscape and to our wildlife. And I think they should be utilized
Yeah.
and planted. They grow really, really well on upland, dry locations.
And you mentioned all these different varieties that are up for sale. Which ones would you say are like the key leaders in your experience? Like if somebody's like thinking like they're listening to us now, they're like, well, I want to put some chestnuts in, and like I'd like to mimic American chestnuts as much as I can. Want to do what's ecologically sound. What's my best strategy here? We obviously know it's not going to be perfect because the
Right.
pure
I mean,
American's
the
not going to be able to
go-to,
survive.
so you got trade names out there on their F3 bred, which means they've been bred 3 different times to get those genetics to be true. And they're Chinese American hybrids. There may be a little teeny tiny bit in there
Of Chinese.
of Chinese
So
that
it's
gives them the
mostly an American
resistance.
chestnut that has a little bit of Chinese.
Right.
Hmm.
And you're going to see the phenotype will change a little bit based on what hybrids you have, whether it's a tall timber type or it's a Chinese type. Even though they have a little bit of the genetics. And when you have those together, you're still going to get variation because they're still crossbreeding.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do your little genetic Putnam square thing, you're going to get a percentage all the time that are different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the American Chinese hybrid is kind of our go-to right now.
Right.
Until we have better information. We're working with the Chestnut Foundation on 2 different foundation plantings, 2 different individuals, 2 different pathways on genetics, and we're planting about 5,000 of each group separately. different properties, and we're going to let those grow, and then we're going to inoculate those plants, pull out the affected plants, keep the ones that are tolerant, and continue to breed those for future seed source.
Right.
And
I don't know if I've mentioned fully, I may have briefly mentioned it, you also run a plant nursery.
yeah, so I've had a native plant nursery since early 2000, which was started on premise that we got tired of trying to buy plants from other people for doing our environmental restoration projects, mainly wetlands, floodplains, and streams, and large scale riparian buffers for crep. And it was just a nightmare trying to find the material.
Mhm.
So, out of need, we started our own nursery, and it's expanded greatly. I mean, you saw it
Yes.
this spring. That's our 20 years into the deal.
Mhm.
And it's anything from bare root production to seed production, propagation from cuttings. We do herbaceous, shrubs, and trees, both for the Piedmont region and the coastal plain region.
Right. And there's nothing like growing them in this environment like that to really get to know your plants. And that's part of
Right.
why you get this knowledge about stuff that I'm like, God, how does Lee know about this? Well, you're sitting in there in your nursery, you can watch these plants in
You can
different
see how
environmental
they do,
conditions. Yeah.
you know?
I always like to plant stuff in my yard so I can keep an eye on it and see how it does and
Well,
get to
one
know
of
the
the things
plants.
we're working on right now is, for the quail habitat stuff, everybody wants the red cedar, the junipers for quick cover, hedgerow habitat, even though you're going to modify those plants down the road by cutting them down or whatever, thermal cover produces some seed, but they are a pain in the neck as bare roots.
Hmm.
They can look beautiful and you dig them up, store them, or transplant them right away. And if you get the wrong weather conditions, they're brown.
Hmm.
So we've been actually growing them in plugs from seed, minimize the transplant stress,
Hmm.
pulling them out and replanting them. And that's the route
Improve
we're
survival
headed with
rates.
that.
Right. Right. Cool. So sorry, I took you off because you were talking about chestnuts. And so if somebody's interested in chestnuts, they should look up. Your recommendation at this point is a Chinese American hybrid.
Right.
Now, there's certain characteristics you should look for. Should you look for this F3? Are there things that you can kind of make sure you're getting something of decent quality, or are there some you would name that people might want to just like pick?
Yeah. So the main hybrid that's been out there is trademarked. And you can buy those seedlings. They're proven, but you can't really
You can save the
propagate
seeds and sell
those.
them to other people or propagate them.
Right. Can't really propagate or sell those down the road.
Gotcha.
There's other hybrids out there that are not trademarked, and they may be genetically tested and they may not. They may, 20% Chinese in there. And the other hybrids that are out there, the European and Asian and stuff like that, are good as well. And they're advertised based on what time of the year they drop their nuts, how long they hold them, whether they're this big or they're colossals, that kind of stuff. So they all have a place. Depends on how you want to develop your
Hmm.
plan.
Right.
If you're looking at that as being one of your hard mass crops and you would extend that season, there's a couple different varieties you can plant
To
to,
drop
to
through the
do that.
season. Yeah.
But understand that over time they're going to hybridize. So those nuts that you get are going to be a combination of all those species
Interesting.
if you plant them next to each other.
Interesting. Gotcha.
So you're going to have a different thing
Right.
down the road.
Gotcha. Cool. Anything else on trees? I'm
It's
sure we could go
my
on.
recommendations are if you're planting trees, do uneven age stands. So not all your seedlings are the same age. Do stuff that's a short timetable and a long timetable,
Mhm.
because some are shorter lived. You're going to get your results faster while you're letting the other stuff cook
Yep.
and take their time.
Cool. Cool.
And I don't particularly like planting things in a grid,
Right.
but
Right. Let it be a little random.
if you're doing NRCS type stuff, you got to, that's their spec. But I like doing the edge effect, get your shapes, get your travel corridors to pull those animals out of that forest land into where you want them. If you're hunting, where you would want to watch them or see them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you can step it down from trees to intermediate sized trees, large shrubs to your
Grasslands.
meadow.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Well, this has been really cool. I hope this has been helpful for everybody who's jumped in on the joined us live. Thank you guys. We're doing a new thing out here in the field. I had a good time. was nice being live with you.
It's a little
Sharing
warm.
this. It's hot. We're sitting here baking.
Dog's under the tractor.
Dog's smart in the shade over there. But thank you, Lee. I really appreciate you joining us. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too. So
I'd like to do
stay
it again.
tuned. Yeah, we'll do it again, and this will go up on YouTube if you want to watch it again or share it with others. Thank y'all very much.